Welcome to our SmallCarbon webinar. We're really excited to have so many of you joining us here today, and it's been amazing seeing so much interest in the tool. We'll just give a couple of moments for everyone to join and then go into some notices. Okay, welcome everyone. So we'll just get started. So it's great to see loads of you have signed up for beta testing. Just a reminder that it will close on Monday, the 15th of December. If you haven't signed up yet, that's fine. You've still got time to sign up. And you can do that using the QR code on the screen now, or we will also circulate a link after the webinar. Once you've done testing, do also remember to submit your feedback, and that will really help us tailor the tool to what you need. So to get us started today, we're just going to begin with a couple of polls just to find out kind of where everyone's at with carbon studies. So the first question, and these are anonymous, so feel free to answer. The first one's, does your practice already carry out carbon studies? And the options are yes, in-house, yes, outsourced, or no, not at all. And then the second question, how would you rate your practice's carbon literacy? And that's on a scale of 0 to 5, with 0 being kind of non-existent and then 5 being complete expert. So I'll just leave that up so you can keep filling it in, and we'll come back to those in a second. And while you're doing that, we'll just have a look at the agenda for today. So we'll start with Tom from Studio Bark, and he will be giving us a background to the tool, looking at how to get started using it, and also how to use the materials library. And then Hannah will be showing us the Buildups and comparisons tool. And then finally, we'll have a look at the project's case study with Misbah. And once we've had the demos, we'll go into a Q&A session with Tom from Studio Bark, Sash from Looper, and Tom from Etude. And we'll just finish with an announcement and next steps. So if we just take a look at the results from the polls, it looks like a bit of a mixture. A lot of you aren't doing any in-house, aren't doing any carbon studies at all. Some are doing them in-house, and a few of you are doing them outsourced. And then in terms of carbon literacy, it looks like most of you are kind of somewhere in the middle, but also a bit of a range. So hopefully you will find this session useful. So we'll dive right in and go into the presentations, starting with Tom's demo.
Hello. Just before we dive in, I'm going to give a bit of context. So we're here to talk about measuring and reducing embodied carbon. And if you're here, you probably appreciate why that matters. But just to remind ourselves, the carbon and environmental cost of producing construction materials is vast. Globally, embodied carbon in construction is reckoned to amount to around 11% of greenhouse emissions. On a building level, the balance of embodied versus operational carbon varies a lot from type to type and building to building. but embodied carbon can be up to 3/4 of a building's total carbon impact. So very significant. The framework that we're using in the UK construction context is the RICS modular framework. And simply put, module A is the upfront emissions, so involved in producing materials, constructing the building. Module B is in-use emissions, and C is end of life, so deconstruction, demolition, and processing. In terms of how we got here with SmallCarbon, for us, this is all very much rooted in a renewed sense of public concern around the climate crisis, which arose particularly in 2018 and 2019. And Studio Bark is very much a practice founded on environmental principles. But even so, this was very much a catalytic point in time for us, particularly with XR increasing public visibility and the political salience of the issue. Many of us got involved in ACAN, the Architects Climate Action Network. As a practice, we signed up to Architects Declare. So there was this renewed sense of urgency and commitment. And we've seen downstream from this a number of industry initiatives, so benchmarking, policy proposals, and also specific technical standards. In 2020, we ran a program of internal upskilling, and off the back of that, we developed a spreadsheet calculator, which looks something like this. This was essentially a two-step process, so of manually drawing up a bill of quantities and then going line by line and inputting those quantities into the spreadsheet. This is an example of the kind of output, project output that we might get from this process. So perhaps at stage 2, we might do an upfront carbon study, such as a simple comparison of build-up options to look at the relative impact of different material choices. And then in stage 3, we might look at embodied carbon over the life cycle, or perhaps undertake a whole life carbon assessment. And so we had this suite of spreadsheets that we developed, and they were quite good in a way, as we understood exactly what was going into them and how they worked. But they were also quite complicated, time consuming, and sort of difficult to use, really. And on top of this, last year, the RICS released the second edition of their framework, which added quite a few sort of complexities to the calculation. And so, yeah, in a sense, we felt it might be difficult to modify the spreadsheets to kind of keep up with that revised guidance. And this is a mind map that we constructed of that new RICS framework to sort of help us understand it. Also last year, we won some Creative Catalyst funding from Innovate UK to develop a tool focused specifically on the needs of SMEs. And this allowed us to take our spreadsheets and develop them into what has now become SmallCarbon. To do that, we've been working with Looper and Etude. Looper are a tech company with expertise in LCAs. We have Sash speaking later. Etude are environmental engineers with specialism in net zero and energy. And we have Tom from Etude here to speak as well. So why are we focused on SMEs? And the obvious answer is that we are one, and we're trying to solve our own problem to an extent. But actually, SMEs account for 80% of registered practices in the UK, and 26% of practices are sole practitioners. So that is a huge chunk of the profession, which is arguably underserved at the moment. And one of the things that we did early on in the funding period was to put out a survey. And there were some recurring themes that emerged there. So, you know, people were finding carbon counting to be complex, to be difficult, and also time consuming. But really the point of all of this is not only to calculate carbon, but to reduce it. You've probably seen versions of this sort of graph in previous talks. In essence, the opportunity to reduce carbon is greatest in the earlier stages, but there's also a lot of uncertainty at that point, a lot of unknowns about the project, and so that's the challenge really. But this is very much the part of the design process that we've chosen to zoom in on, and in order to have that greater impact. This illustrates the basic idea behind the tool, so it's sometimes known as the area method. In essence, if you know the basic areas of your building, the elements, total area of walls and roofs, etc., you can then apply a build up to those, and this quickly generates an estimate bill of quantities. And that bill of quantities can serve as the basis for your carbon calculation. So just to wrap up the preamble and to summarize what we're aiming to achieve with SmallCarbon, we wanted it to be standalone, to be customizable so that users could get a kind of bespoke and accurate representation of their project. We wanted it to be intuitive and perhaps even enjoyable to use. Affordability is a key criteria. So the idea on this front is to adopt a kind of freemium approach. So there will be some form of free access, but companies who want to use the tool for commercial purposes can sign up to a subscription account. And we're still figuring out what those costs would be, but it's very likely to be a sliding scale. So depending on what size of organization you are. And the final point is that it's tailored to the workflows of SMEs. So that's the backstory. And without further ado, let's jump in and have a little look at SmallCarbon. So SmallCarbon is a web app, and to get access to it, you'll need to create an account. Once you've done that, you can use your credentials to log in, and you should arrive at a home page which looks something like this. The tool essentially has two main areas. So there's a library area and a projects area, accessible here on the left from the navigation menu, which is also collapsible. So yeah, just to dive into the library area, if you have a look at the materials section, this is really the foundation of the tool, is a library of materials sorted into different categories and subcategories. And if you navigate through these, you can find a record for each material. And clicking into that, you can see the carbon factors for that material and some of the other assumptions and factors which will be used in the calculation. So a lot of the product stage data is coming from the ICE database, and we supplemented this with some specific EPD data to extend the range of materials on offer within the tool. A lot of the later stage assumptions are drawn directly from the RICS guidance. So that's the materials library, and you can also search for a specific material here in the search bar and click into that record. If you can't find something that you really need, it's possible to add a custom material. So to do that, here at the top right, you can click Add Custom Material and then fill in this form. And once you submit that, that material will get added to your sort of private area within SmallCarbon. The other thing we've got here, each user by default will have their own sort of private organization, which is a bit like your own sort of private drive, for example, if you use Google Drive. But you can also then invite people to join your organization, or you can request to join other organizations. So if you're using this at a practice level, it's possible to collaborate across multiple accounts. So that is a very brief overview of the tool. I'm now going to hand over to Hannah, who's going to run through Buildups.
So, in addition to storing a range of commonly used materials, the library also gives us the option to create buildups, which are assemblies of one or more material. So we can do that within the Buildups tab. We click on the New Buildup button to get started. We'll be prompted to give our buildup a name. I'll be making a UBuild acoustic wall. So if you click next, it will launch the Buildup Maker window. We can then assign a buildup, an element type. So depending on whether this is a floor, wall, roof, window, etc. We can then begin to add material layers. So for each layer, we can give it a name, assign a material, select a RIX category, and give it a thickness. There is also a default transport scenario, which we can modify if needed. The tool then calculates the mass of each material line and the carbon impact and sequestered biogenic impact too. So then you can go ahead and add all the layers for a particular build-up. You can also add child or nested objects within the layers, for example, for stud walls or UBuild partition structure. The thickness of that layer is fixed, but you can choose the width and spacing of that nested element. Whilst you're creating the build-up maker allows you to duplicate, delete, and change the order of different layers. You can then kind of continue to make those edits and additions until you are happy with the final build-up. The Buildup Maker shows at the top there also a basic visualization of the arrangement as you go along. That's showing live the adjustments that you're making. The graph here is also showing the total product stage impact for a 1 square meter section of this build-up alongside the sequestered biogenic carbon too. So once that's ready, you can save that build-up. You can then view all of your build-ups within the library. And one option that could be quite useful for your workflows is to make a duplication of that build-up. For instance, if you wanted to test the impact of different material changes. In this instance, we could change all of the insulation to sheep's wool, which is what I'm doing here. This will show updates in the build-up visualization, but also the carbon intensity graph. So as you hover over those different materials, it shows the overall build-up and what's attributed to each of those different materials. So back in the library, you can see that duplicated build-up. And then like with materials, you have the option to compare different build-ups. So different 1 square meter build-ups for carbon impact. You can then see that we've got the different UBuild acoustic wall options, plus one that I made earlier showing PIR and MDF. And you can also download that as a JPEG too. So that's everything. And I will now hand over to Misbah to talk you through a project.
Thanks, Anna. So now we move on to the part of the tool that allows you to undertake carbon assessments for projects. So first we'll need to set up a project, which we can do by clicking New Project. And for this section, we just need some basic background information. So the tool will take you through some questions that you can fill out here. Project address, type of building it is, what stage it's at, an anticipated year of completion, and a kind of location context. And then we have a chance to pop in some areas for demolition, new build or retrofit. And then the third section is inputting your building element information. So for this part, it's really helpful to have a digital model that you can reference and get some areas or dimensions from. So I'm just going to start going in and putting in some build-ups here. And it's also helpful to have the build-ups that you want to use saved in your library already. But if you don't, it's not a problem. You can always skip this stage down the bottom and come back to it later. And you can also come back and edit it at a future date. But as an example of how this works with a digital model, I can show you one that I've made earlier. So if I was to take the areas of the external walls, I can simply just pan over, select these areas, bearing in mind that it does take into account the openings, so that would have to be within your area calculation. The tool won't automatically take out your window areas. And here I've got 173 square meters. So I will come back into the tool and put 173 in here, making sure I change that to external walls. And you can type in to search for any build-ups that you want here. And you can also delete any sections, any rows are irrelevant to your project, or equally just leave them blank and it will automatically take them out at the end. Down here, there's another section for additional building elements. So these would be things like balustrades, windows and roof lights, external doors, internal doors, and so on. Again, like I mentioned, there's no need to kind of put this data in at this point. You can always come back to it later. The next section is about operational information. So you can say whether or not energy modelling has been carried out. In this case, I'm going to say no, which is absolutely fine. The tool will still calculate your embodied carbon over life cycle and your upfront carbon. You can select a heat source and hit Create Project. This then takes you to this kind of landing page, and at this point I'm actually going to take you over to a previous version that I've done where I've inputted all of those kind of values for the build-ups already. So on the overview page you have these kind of introductory elements, and you can also edit these if you wanted to then update things like your total energy consumption once you do have an energy model available. But if we then go through the tabs up here, we come onto quantities and the build-ups, and you'll see here this has now listed out all the different build-ups that I had initially selected in that pop-up when I was creating the project. And here you have the chance to enter your own kind of build-up name for those elements. So if I have ground floor, I can again call that ground floor. I can call these timber-clad walls, and so on. And you can hit Save Changes. And then the next tab would be materials. This is a bit of a quirk of the tool, which some of the people who are our beta testers might have come across. But you have to go through each of these tabs and hit Save Changes in order to see your final results. So I might just delete this over here and click Save Changes. But if I did want to add something in here, this would be where you can add in things like a one-off steel or timber beam, timber pergola or balustrades, things that don't necessarily need a build-up as such, but are a single material. So for example, if I had a timber pergola in here, and I can select softwood. As you type, it will search for those materials. And I can say it doesn't necessarily fit under any of these, so it doesn't, maybe we put it as external walls. And then the RIX element we can select here. And from my 3D model, I can get a volume. So I'll take you back to that. And if I select my pergola here, I'll see I've got 0.24 meters cubed. So we can go back into the tool and directly put in the volume here. So it's 0.24. And you'll see as I scroll across, that's automatically generated those calculations. And then I save changes and go through to the allowances tab. And this is where you can review all your MEP details. So these are assumptions made and inputting depending on the type of heat source that you've selected earlier on. And in future, we're hoping to kind of get a PV allowance in here as well. Then we come through to our calculation tab, and this is where your bill of quantities is generated. So that earlier pop-up where you're inputting all of your dimensions and your build-ups, that's essentially calculating this very fast bill of quantities in the background. So here you can kind of scroll through and it will have each of the materials listed and their quantities. A handy feature here is that you can toggle on and off different columns depending on what you'd like to see. And then we come through to the results tab. So this then shows you a summary of results in terms of upfront carbon, embodied carbon over lifetime, and operational carbon. You can export this as a CSV, and you can also change your unit. So you can show it as total carbon per meter squared or per occupants. And as you scroll down, you then get that separated by modules. So whether it's upfront carbon, the use stage, operational, end of life, and then finally separated by the RICS life cycle stages. And then we have the charts. So the first one is for upfront carbon. As you can see here, again, you have choices for toggling different options. So you can show total carbon per meter squared, which is arguably probably the most helpful one because it then benchmarks against industry standards. And you see a short summary down at the bottom here, or per occupant. And again, you can group pie chart on the side by different elements. So whether it's RICS, NRM, or building elements. And this will then show how that split of carbon is across those different categories. And then you can change the type of chart you see, just depending on what you prefer. And again, you can then download that as a PNG up at the top. And then the last graph is a life cycle embodied carbon with similar options for how you see those. If I then wanted to make an adjustment to this, or I wanted a different version that I can use as an optioneering, I can go back to the kind of parent page, Barkhouse here, and this takes me to an overview where you've got an option to upload a project image. You can see your graphs benchmarking your upfront carbon and your embodied carbon against the standards, and down at the bottom you have your versions. So at the moment we've only got version 1. But I can then, on the left-hand side in the tab, select version 1, the 3 dots, and duplicate this to version 2. And here I can then change something as an optioneering element. So for example, if I went into my build-ups and I wanted to change my roof from a timber-clad roof to a corrugated metal roof, I can do that here, save changes. And again, just remembering to scroll through the tabs just to make sure that the results update properly. Through here, and hopefully this will have updated. So if we go through to our Barkhouse, you'll see here it's now comparing the 2 options on our charts, and you've also got 2 summaries showing those figures. And that concludes this part of the demonstration of the tool, and I'll hand you back to Sophie now. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tom, Hannah and Misbah. It's great to see the tool in action. So now we're going to go on to the Q&A session of our webinar. And I'm joined by our panel, Tom from Studio Bark, Sash from Looper, and Tom from Etude. We've already had some brilliant questions, so please keep them coming in. And any that we don't have time to answer today, we'll answer them in a document that we'll share with everyone after the session. So we'll start with a few questions that have come in advance of the webinar. So question 1, and this will be for Tom William. What are the data sources being used for the different materials? And as a follow-up to that, how do you obtain verifiable information on embodied energy of materials, products, delivery, and construction processes?
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's great to see the tool, by the way. It looks really good. Haven't seen it for a little bit of time, so it looks like it's coming along really well. In terms of the materials, so I guess everyone knows on the call, or a lot of people know that the material information around embodied carbon is quite patchy. It is getting a lot better, but there's a lot out there, so you have to be quite discerning when you're looking around for what you choose at different stages of the process. Everyone needs to try and work towards getting an EPD for a product. So that's ideally what you want to have, something that's like been third-party verified, is in date. So you need to check the expiry date on that EPD to make sure it's from a recent point in time. And then, that tells you essentially what material, the carbon intensity of that material going into your building. But that's the ideal situation. There's a lot of other stages before you get to that point, and quite early on in the design stage, which is kind of when a lot of people were using this tool, there isn't going to be an EPD necessarily available, or you're not going to be sure what product to use. So there it's good to fall back on the databases. So, within the BARC tool, there's a reference to the ICE database, which is kind of a very high level summary of carbon information around very big materials. Other good places to look are in kind of EPD libraries and trying to build up your own kind of picture of what the spread of material information might be out there. So maybe like there's 5 kind of products that have EPDs, so you could pick across those 5 products and say, here's an average of the performance, or this is a reasonable level to pitch from those performance from these EPDs that you found. And for that, there's a few places you can look. People who have access to OneClick, there is the OneClick library, which is a very comprehensive list of EPDs, but not many people have that, and it's quite expensive, obviously, to access. There's also something called Materials 2050, which is a good online database to go look in. So I suggest going to look in there if you can't find something easily. But the important thing to do is to be like realistic with the numbers that you're using. So if you are using a very approximate number, the RICS guidance gives clear kind of percentages to put on top of that number, so that you will account for the fact that it's a guess or a guesstimate at that point in time. So you use those to your advantage and be clear about what you know and what you don't know, and be very honest in your feedback as well. Like we've seen in the BARC tool, there's plenty of notes fields as you go through the assessment. So like laying out like where you made an assumption and what that assumption is very important for when you come back and redo your work at a later stage and try and refine your proposals. So yeah, there's plenty of information out there. Be very discerning, be honest about it, and don't get hung up on the small fry. Like think about the big numbers, because your carbon assessment will come down to some very big numbers, and being clear about the information going into those is more important than focusing on like the glue in the walls or something like that. Something very small that won't contribute very much.
Great, thank you, Tom. That's really useful advice. And the second question, this one will be for Sash. So this is from a practice who say, as a practice, we are in the early stages of adopting carbon measuring tools and have tested out a number. How do you recommend gaining confidence in the data output from the tools?
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because I think building confidence in carbon data is really about combining methodological transparency with practical kind of validations. So in our case, because we're still in early stages of developing this tool and also like learning from various other tools, it's important that we understand not just the final numbers, but the data sources and assumptions that are attached to those numbers. So our approach in this case, and it's still a work in progress, is to basically 3 things. First of all, is to have a very sound, clear, well-documented methodology. The second is data quality assessment. So we have that methodology defining how we do assessment of data coming from various sources. And the third is consistency checks across different known benchmarks. So for example, in the tool shown today, like we have all the calculations and results coming in. In future, what you will see is a data quality indicator attached to all the different results, which kind of gives you an indication that, okay, if the data source is, let's say if it's an EPD, how would the result, the confidence is compared to data coming from more average generic data points, which is like such as ICE database coming from lots of accumulation of different data sources. So that's in our roadmap for development. So we have already had few calls internally on preparing this methodology and on documenting. So the tool in future can give you this data quality indicator along with an information button, which you can click to expand and see how actually the tool calculates those data confidence and help you make the apple-to-apple comparison.
Great, thank you, Sash. That's really helpful. And a question for Tom Bennett. Do you have any intention to roll out this tool to students and encourage them to make use of it early in their careers?
Thanks, Sophie. Absolutely, yes. So once the tool is launched, whatever the kind of subscription model is, we want to make sure that there's a kind of free way for students and people in education to kind of access the tool and use it. So I'd say in addition to that, we'd like to build up a library of resources, so kind of tutorials and other sorts of educational material, which could hopefully be a useful resource for students. Just to kind of work on the area of carbon literacy. I guess the final point to make is that if you are a student on this call, then do consider signing up to the beta testing program, which is still open, as mentioned, until the 15th of December. So do consider signing up to that. And if you're, say, a tutor or perhaps an academic, please feel free to spread the word with your students and your colleagues as well.
Great, thank you, Tom. So we'll take a look at some of the questions coming in through the chat. So creating a new material, what if we don't know the end of life scenario figures? Are the presets the average for most materials? Who would like to take this one? Tom.
Yeah, I could start with this. So in terms of what's happening within SmallCarbon, we've referred back quite heavily to the RICS guidance, which has some standard assumptions for module C, sort of C2 and C3 and C4, which are kind of the demolition stage sort of life cycle modules. So yeah, if you can't get specific data, then it is best really, particularly if you're doing an early stage study, just to use those kind of standard assumptions that you can find in RICS. But I don't know if Tom, William, if you wanted to add to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, there is some complex calculations in there, isn't there, about different material types. So there is assumptions if they fall into particular categories, what happens to them. So the tool does that kind of background categorization to some extent. But if it is something more bespoke that you wouldn't necessarily doesn't fall into those categories, essentially you'll have to make your own judgment based on what the CIBSE guidance offers. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix. Nothing clear cut completely.
Great, thank you. And looking at another question. So someone says the build-up library looks fantastic. Thank you very much. It would be brilliant to be able to combine this with a U-value calculator and possibly even WFI analysis. Is that a possibility? Maybe Tom, William, yeah.
I'm happy to take it. Yeah. So I mean, essentially, yes. It would be fairly simple to create a U-value calculator, because what the build-up calculation is doing already is basically a U-value calculation. You kind of see it a similar thing to what you might get in PHP or other kind of energy assessment tools, and it even looks a bit similar to kind of what the build desk option is. So yeah, for those familiar with U-values, it kind of looks very familiar. The thing it's missing obviously is the thermal resistances that you need of the materials. So it depends on the appetite for adding that into the library and having a user option for it as well. But I don't think a U-value calculation is beyond the pale. The WFI calculation, I would steer clear of for the moment, just because that's a bit more of a complex beast and has a whole load of other implications that you might not want to muddle in with the whole life carbon calculation at the same time. But I think operational and embodied obviously are a good thing to have on the same screen and balance out.
Great, thank you. And another question. So do you have a plan for this to be incorporated into BIM via wall composites so it could be pre-generated? they've also said it's probably a big question or already on your agenda to take it to Revit and ArchiCAD.
Yeah, I guess to start off with this one, I mean, one of the aims is for it to be software agnostic, so it's kind of a standalone thing. And that's partly because in small practice land, we're all using different softwares. So sort of keeping that mass appeal of a standalone thing. But that said, it could be possible in the future to build modules which would integrate with different softwares. I don't know if Sash, if you wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, I think I completely echo your thoughts there, Tom. Honestly, you captured everything there, so I've pretty much blanked out for anything further I could add there. So yeah, as you said.
Great, so we can go on to another question. Do we need to include fixtures and finishes in the calculation? For example, kitchen fittings and wall tiles?
Happy to take that one if you want. I mean, yeah, ideally that's the good thing to do, but realistically, you know, it's one of those smaller things. I think there are definitely elements of the internal finishes that add a lot. So carpets are always a surprising number when you add them in. So consider the kind of big hitters of that, but don't get bogged down too much in the detail of those, because again, it's an 80-20 rule on these kind of assessments. You want to put your effort into the big numbers to start with, and you don't want to spend too much time picking on things that are very likely to change before you get to the construction phase. So, you know, as you move through the design phases, then increasingly think about those items, but don't at stage 2 start to get obsessed about the tiles and what they commit to it. I mean, there is kind of rules again in the RICS professional guide around how, you know, which elements you must consider in a formal assessment. So again, it's what the purpose of the assessment is as well, whether it's going towards demonstrating some kind of planning compliance or compliance with a particular standard or not, or whether it's just for your information about like making good informed design choices. And if it's that second one, then again, like focusing on the things that you can really have an influence on and make a big difference is what you should be doing, ideally.
Great, thank you. Next question. Will there be an option to add in elements that aren't included in the building category section when applying materials and information regarding a project?
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the moment, so within the quantities area, there are sort of 3 sections. So there are build-ups, there's materials, and also allowances. So certainly within the materials tab, you could add anything really, like any quantity of material, including perhaps a bespoke material, which you might have added to the library yourself. So at the moment, that would probably be the main way to deal with any kind of miscellaneous quantities. But yeah, I think in future we'd like to expand the functionality of the allowances tab as well, so that people can make specific adjustments if they need to.
Great, thank you, Tom. Another question. So how do you tend to determine transport origin of materials when it's unclear whether the contractor will source them locally or from abroad?
Yeah, so I was quickly trying to type a message to Ruby in the chat, but I didn't get there in time. So in terms of transport, it is a bit of a tricky thing to manage as well, because yeah, you don't really know at the early design stage where things are coming from. Again, going back to the RICS guidance, so in the RICS guidance, there's some general categories of where things can come from in the world, and whether it's normally a nationally supplied thing or a European supplied thing, and then it gives you some generic distances and approaches to transport that you can use. So that's a good starting point if you want to get a rough number, but there's no kind of single right way to do it. You kind of look at the material, typically where it might come from or where it's manufactured, and then use one of those kind of categories that it falls into. And that's the best you can probably do at an early stage until you then refine that as you go through the design phases again.
Great, thank you, Tom. And this one, I think for Sash. The challenge we face is how to balance and navigate between embodied and operational carbon. How can we make decisions that reduce operational carbon, but may increase embodied carbon, and vice versa? What's your view, and can it be addressed in the tool?
That's another really excellent question, because it is indeed a challenge sometimes when we plan and design the operational carbon. Reducing it can impact embodied carbon. So our approach to the tool currently is the comparison feature. So on the left-hand side sidebar, there is a compare button, which kind of creates another pop-up view where you can enter different build-ups that you created. So basically, that's a way for you to test different projects, different versions of projects, and compare them. So while the problem that we have at hand is really complex, we might find some way to engineer a better solution in terms of a UI, UX kind of point of view. But at the moment, the tool, what it has on offer is a compare feature. So you can compare different versions. One is maybe embodied low version, another operational low version, another could be like a mix of both. And you can compare different aspects, like what are the key contributors, hotspot analysis, and the compare feature. So that would be my take on that.
Great, thank you, Sash. And then also, could you confirm that the range of materials in the library also includes traditional materials, in addition to low carbon materials like hemp and timber?
Yep. I mean, the kind of materials database is drawing very heavily on the ICE database, which people might know about. So that includes a lot of the sort of standard conventional materials like brick or concrete block or standard forms of timber. So all that stuff is in there. Yeah, I mean, we've tried to ensure quite a broad range of materials in the library so that most people could model most projects without needing to add custom materials. But yeah, I mean, if you're having a play with the tool as part of the beta testing and you see a sort of glaring gap in the materials library, please do give us that feedback so that we can address it in future versions of the tool.
Great, thank you. And just a couple more questions. So this is the last one from the chat. Will it be able to work with existing buildings? Is there a way to factor this in without a super detailed audit? And what about reused materials?
Yeah, so quickly on this one, because there's a few questions I think popping up in the Q&A around it. So in general, because those elements aren't going to contribute to your carbon emissions for whatever you're doing, then you would kind of, in a typical embodied carbon assessment, you would ignore them for the purposes of the assessment and the number you're trying to create. So obviously they're very important in the role that they play, and you should consider them and do all of the work in terms of auditing and working out what you can keep on site. But in terms of what you actually then go on to measure in terms of the impact, you're just looking at what you're adding on or amending potentially to keep those materials in situ as far as possible. So I don't think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom or Sash, but the tool really has anything around reuse materials at the moment in particular and quantifying the benefits of that, but you don't typically need to for the actual assessment.
Great, thank you. And then just one last question. How much will the tool cost and when will it be launched?
Yeah, two very good questions. In terms of the kind of cost model that we're looking at, I mean, firstly, just to say why we would be looking at that is centered on the ambition to make the tool self-sustaining, essentially. So we'd like in future for there to be some sort of revenue stream that can be used to maintain the tool. So if there are updates to the guidance or particular features that we need to incorporate, there's some resource to do that. Obviously in 2024, so last year the tool was Innovate UK funded. This year we've been pursuing it in a completely sort of self-funded way. And there's sort of some limits to how far we can take that. So that's the context. In terms of the model itself, as mentioned, it would probably be a subscription model, sort of monthly, kind of flexible subscription on a sliding scale. So depending on what size organization you are, and we're still really kind of figuring out exactly what the numerical side of that might be. But just to say, to sort of give people a sense, I suppose we'd be looking, for a small to medium sized company, a monthly subscription might be between 20 and £50, something like that. Those are the sort of ballpark numbers that we're currently considering. But yeah, just finally to say there will always be some form of free access as well. So for upskilling or for internal purposes, we want to ensure that people can always access this for free to some extent. Oh, and yeah, on time was the other question about timescales.
Yes,
Yeah.
when's it going to be launched?
So the intention at the moment would be to launch early next year. So to make this available more properly early in sort of 2026. But it also really depends a bit on what the nature of the feedback that we get from all the beta testers and how much work we think is required to make this something that people really want to use. So do get us that feedback. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tom. And thanks everyone for your brilliant questions, and to all of our panel for your very insightful answers. As I mentioned before, we will put together a document with all of the questions and answers, including the ones that we didn't get around to answering in the session. So that will be sent to everyone afterwards. So before we wrap up, just another reminder that beta testing will close on Monday, the 15th of December. You can sign up using the QR code on the screen, and the link for that will also be in the email after the webinar. And please do submit your feedback. The form takes 5 minutes and is really helpful for us. I'm going to hand over to Hannah now, who has an announcement.
Yes, hello. As Sophie says, we have an announcement. So we're looking for a small group of launch sponsors to help raise the final funding we would need to launch SmallCarbon early next year. So ultimately, it is developed by and funded for those who are invested in its creation. What this sponsorship will cover, so final tool development. Part of this is refining the tool based on beta testing feedback, quality assurance, so you can feel confident in the results, alongside branding and hosting setup, but also ensuring adequate insurances and accreditation for commercial release. What you would gain as a sponsor, so you'll have a free commercial license for 5 years from launch. This can be supported by an exclusive CPD offering, so how to use lifecycle analysis as a revenue stream. Studio Bark have successfully expanded our services by offering in-house carbon studies, and you can also learn how your practice can implement this model too. And finally, you can receive industry recognition. So by becoming a sponsor, you can be recognized and raise your profile ultimately as leaders in carbon counting and environmental design. This can also be supported by recognition across the SmallCarbon platform as well. So there are limited places with tiered options available based on practice size. So if you are interested, please drop us an email at info@studiobark.co.uk to find out a little bit more about this. So yeah, we look forward to hearing from you, and I'll pass back to Sophie.
I'm muted. Okay, thank you, Anna. And to all of you, thank you for joining us today. It's been great to see so much interest. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Studio Bark. We've also got a SmallCarbon mailing list, and the link to sign up to that will be in the email after the session. We'll be sharing the webinar link as well. There'll be a recording of the webinar. You can also get in touch to info@studiobark.co.uk if you want to have a kind of more of a conversation with us about the tool. So thank you everyone for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.